Hi everyone, I'm Jen Lucas, Managing Editor of the Knitting Circle, and I want to welcome you to today's live event. Today I'm very excited to be sharing some of our popular tutorials that have been on our website because we are celebrating 2 years of the Knitting Circle this month. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being here for the last 2 years as we've been finding joy in our stitches, learning all kinds of new techniques, and working on a lot of fun projects along the way. So like I said, I'm going to show you 3 of our most popular techniques on our website. We have videos for all of these on our website. And in addition to that, you can get the download that shows you how to do all these techniques as well. And you'll find a link to that download in the description wherever you are watching. And the techniques that we're going to be going over today are the German twisted cast on, the bamboo stitch, and the knit two together through the back loop bind off. So we've got a little bit of everything. Cast on, a little bit of knitting, and then a bind off. In addition to that, I'm going to show you a few of the projects that I've designed and shown you how to make in some of our lives over the last couple years. And we will be telling you what those patterns are, and so that you can go and find them on our free patterns page and download them for yourself as well. So as we're getting started, I just want to remind everybody that there is a chat box wherever you are watching, so be sure to drop in and say hello. If you have knit any particular pattern from our website, we would love to know if what you've made from our free patterns page, or maybe from one of the projects from our live events. Let us know what type of project maybe you're working on right now while you're watching. Let us know where you're watching from. And of course, if you have any questions about what I'm doing along the way, be sure to drop those in the chat as well, and I will answer as many as I can during our time together. So to start, I think I'm going to begin by showing you the German twisted cast on, and then we'll take a look at a few projects, and then we will move on to the next technique. So the German twisted cast on is my favorite cast on to use for just about any project, but in particular I like it for projects where I need that cast on edge to be stretchy. So of course that's things like the start of a hat, the start of top-down socks, cuffs of sweaters, anything that you're going to make for a baby, because babies' heads, for example, are always bigger than you think they're going to be. So I find the German twisted cast on to be a really useful one to have in your knitting tool bag of tricks. So that's the one I'm going to show, and it is one of the most popular videos on our website. So to begin, I'm going to estimate the tail, and estimating the tail for the German twisted cast on is similar to the way I estimate a tail if I'm using the long tail cast on. So if I'm doing a long tail cast on, which obviously uses a long tail, I start by wrapping the yarn around the needle 10 times. So I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so for a long tail cast on, I then unravel that and I say, okay, that's about 10 stitches. And then I fold it over for 20, 30, however many I need, for my cast on. And of course, when I'm using this estimation method, I just want to remind you, it is an estimation. And so, especially if I'm going to be casting on a lot of stitches, then I might add a little bit more to it just to make sure that I, have a little bit of an insurance policy on that tail. But when it comes to the German twisted cast on, I estimate a little bit different, and I actually wrap the yarn around 15 times and estimate that as 10 stitches for my cast on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I want to make sure that when I'm wrapping the yarn around that I'm getting it up onto the fattest part, or the largest part of my knitting needle, just to make sure that I'm estimating my yarn properly. So at this point, I would unravel it and I'll say, okay, that represents 10 stitches. So for the German twisted cast on, I wrap it around 15 times and then estimate that that makes 10 stitches. And the reason is the German twisted cast on takes a little bit more yarn than a long tail cast on. So that's just about right for me. And then we'll fold it over for 20 and so on and so on. So I'm going to start by casting on 20 here. So we're just going to make our slip knot right here. And so then we'll have that long tail. And we're going to hold the yarn the same way we would for a long tail cast on. So the long tail is going to be coming over our thumb, and then the working yarn, that's the one that's going to my little ball of yarn over here, that is going over my index finger. And so when you're doing the long tail cast on, you're going into this loop and around like this. And we do have a video for the long tail cast on too, of course, on our website, as well as the German twisted cast on. But for the German twisted cast on, we're going to go under both loops on the thumb, through the loop on the thumb, come around and pick up that strand on my index finger. And we have this X here from when we brought the needle through initially. We just need to bend. I need to bend my thumb to uncross that and then bring the needle through and then tighten the stitch down. So again, we're going to go under both strands, through the loop on my thumb, pick up the strand on my index finger, uncross the loop on my thumb and bring the needle through, and then I just use my thumb there to tighten the stitch down. So under both strands, through the loop, pick up the strand on the index finger, back through the loop on my thumb, and tighten. So I'm going to go ahead and keep casting on a few more stitches. As I'm doing that, I see that we have some people watching on YouTube. We have Linda in Central Texas, Gianni in Cedar Hill, Texas, Barb from Michigan, and Jean from Northern Ireland. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm so glad that you could be here, and I hope that you enjoy watching our lives and that you've picked up some techniques along the way. Just to remind everybody, if you have missed some of our live events in the past, we do have a section of our website where it just says all live events, and so you can go back and watch any of the old live events that you may have missed. And some of these patterns that I'm going to be talking about, we did do, actually probably all of them, we did do live events for, so you could see if there's anything you like that I'm going to show you in a little bit. You can go back and watch the live video. So let's see how many stitches we have, because I was not counting because I was talking. 2, 5, 7, 10, 12, 15, 17, 20, 22. Got a little excited there, did 2 extra. So I'm just going to do 20 because we're going to end up using this for our bamboo stitch later. And there you go, that's the German twisted cast on. So if we look at some projects where I've used that German twisted cast on, we've got a few hat patterns here we can pull out. So this first one I have here is called the We've Got Spirit hat, and I specifically knit this one in the team colors for my niece who is on a cheerleading squad, and so their colors are this sort of like dark foresty green, white, and then black, so I added the little pom-pom here. But the start of this hat here, I used the German twisted cast on, and you can see it provides a ton of stretch into that cast on edge, which is really, really nice for a hat. And so again, this is the We've Got Spirit hat. I did do a live tutorial on this one, and it's written for a bunch of sizes. It has a little bit of that slip stitch color work that's really fun to do, and then I added the faux fur pom-pom because I've been adding that to everything lately. But this is a really good example of using that German twisted cast on. Another hat which I very recently did just last week on the Knitting Circle is the Gentle Waves hat. And this one I also used that German twisted cast on. I mean, that's just about as stretchy as you can get as far as a cast on edge for a hat. It's really, really nice, and I think it looks really great even with the ribbing. I think it's a really nice detail, and it looks just really, really nice and stretchy. So those are 2 projects you can go ahead and check out. And so now let's go back to one of our other popular tutorials, and that is the bamboo stitch. And so here I have a swatch of the bamboo stitch, and it's a little dark here, but hopefully you'll be able to see, and I'll do it in this pink yarn, which will be a little bit lighter. But basically this bamboo stitch is a really popular stitch pattern, and it's created by adding a yarn over to your knitting needle and then almost immediately passing that yarn over off the needle. So you're increasing and then going back to your original stitch count almost right away. But it makes this really cool fabric, and if you knit it at a loose gauge, this is a pretty loose gauge that I did here on this little swatch, it almost brings together lace and texture without being too much lace or too much texture. So I really, really like it. You could use this for just like any stitch pattern, you could use this for just about anything. I think that this could be really great as like a tote bag, or a beach bag could be really cute. I think even a summer top or tank top, something like that, it would be a beautiful stitch pattern. This one is just really, really fun to do. So let me show you how to do this one. So I've cast on my German twisted cast on, and then like the long tail cast on, I treat the German twisted cast on like that's creating a right side row, and so then I always work a wrong side row before I'm starting my pattern. So I'm just going to knit all the stitches just to make a little bit of a garter stitch border, just one little row of garter stitch here, and then we'll work that bamboo stitch. So for the bamboo stitch, you only need to have a multiple of 2 stitches on the needle. So just an even number of stitches to do this. So even if you just want to make something like a scarf, you could just cast on any even number of stitches and just go for it. So I do, with the bamboo stitch, like to have a little bit of an edging. So I am going to knit just the first 2 stitches normally. And then maybe let's just place a stitch marker here before we're going to start our bamboo stitch. So to do the bamboo stitch, we're going to yarn over, knit 2, and then pass the yarn over the knit 2. And so what that does, let me just grab another needle here. What that does is then that stitch that was the yarn over, it's wrapping around our next 2 stitches that we just knit. And so then we're going to just keep going. Yarn over, knit 2, and then pass the yarn over the knit 2. And keep going. Let's see, Gianni says, looks like a waffle stitch. Yes, it does look like the waffle stitch. And I do think some books, like stitch dictionaries and stuff, some do actually call this a waffle stitch. But I've always called it the bamboo stitch, so that's what we're calling it here. But yes, it does very much look like a waffle stitch. All right, and so we're just going to continue that yarn over, knit 2, pass the yarn over the knit 2. Yarn over, knit 2, pass the yarn over. So you just work that all the way down. And then again, I'm just going to add a little border here of just 2 stitches at the end. So I'm just going to stick another stitch marker on. And knit 2. So one question that I have for everybody as I'm working through this stitch pattern is, what kind of techniques would you like to see for future live events here at the Knitting Circle? Is there a particular technique that you don't know how to do or you're not super familiar with? Is there a specific type of project you would like to see in one of our future live events? If you have something to say about that, please let us know in the chat, because I really do take the comments that we get in the chat during the live events. I take those into consideration. I also look at questions we've received from customer service when I'm deciding what kind of projects to do for whether it's just a free pattern on our site or making video content for our site, or then of course doing these live events. So I would love to know what kind of projects you specifically would like to see in future live events. So for the wrong side of this, all I did was just purl all of the stitches. I maintained my little border of knitting both the first 2 and last 2 stitches. But then on the back, the row 2 of the bamboo stitch is we're just purling all the stitches. And so that's all there is to the bamboo stitch. It's just 2 rows. So let's go ahead and work another 2 rows. So again, it's just that yarn over, knit 2, and then pass the yarn over the knit 2. Okay, Gianni says, I'm a newbie, so I don't know. Everything looks advanced for me. Well, Gianni, I will point you to one place on our website, which is the 14-Day Learn to Knit series. And if you are a newbie, you may already know, some of the basics, obviously, the knit and the purl and that. But in that 14-Day Learn to Knit series, I do start from the beginning. I show you some basic cast-ons, the knit and purl stitch, yarn overs, basic decreases, and then show you how to make an easy cowl pattern that's actually worked flat. And I would encourage you to take a look at our free patterns page or at our live events page on our website, because there are some projects that are pretty beginner. And so let me just finish this row and I'll show you one of them that I think would be good. I would call some of these projects, I would call more of an adventurous beginner, but that's great. Just be an adventurous beginner. And with these live events, after the live events, you can always come back and watch the videos again. That's what's really great about them, is we do put them on the website for you to watch later. And so, you can watch a piece of it over and over again until you get it down. So even if it's not a beginner-friendly pattern necessarily, it doesn't mean you can't do it, because you can always watch those videos over and over again. And most of the projects that I have been doing are more of the advanced beginner to intermediate range. So even if you're a newbie, there's really nothing that would be too difficult for you to do in any of those projects. Okay, let's see. Hypercactus says, I'm new as well, but I would love to see simple sweater construction. That's great. That is something that we have been talking about, is going to some larger projects like sweaters. We've also had a lot of requests for vests and things like that. So that's something that we definitely will consider in the future, because I know that a lot of people do want to knit sweaters. Sometimes knitting a sweater can seem really overwhelming, because it is a lot of knitting that you have to put into it, and it doesn't have to be expensive to knit a sweater, but it can be expensive to knit a sweater. I've spent $30 on yarn for a sweater, and I've spent $300 on yarn for a sweater. So, it's a lot of time and money that goes into it. So yeah, that's something we definitely can take a look at in the future. Let's see, KD Spin says, there are so many I'm unskilled with, but I'm doing a shawl with short rows and getting some holes. Any techniques to stop this? Maybe I'm missing a step. Thank you. So with the short rows, it depends on what short row technique you're using. I do find some are more noticeable than others, and even sometimes you can get a little bit of a hole depending on the short row type. We do have several videos on short rows on our website. I don't know specifically if you're just doing a wrap and turn short row for your particular shawl. That's most commonly the type of short row that is used. But we show how to do yarn over short rows, the German short row method. We have a few other methods on there too. And then also the expert who made them, Mary Beth Temple, she actually did a video that's also on our site that compares all of those short row videos or short row methods all together in one video. So I would encourage you to go check out those short row videos, because maybe it's just a matter of trying a different short row method, because I know for me, for a long time, I avoided short rows too, because I never liked how they look. And so now I like to use either the German short row method or the Japanese short row method. I find both of those work pretty good for me, but for you, it might be different. A lot of times it just comes down to how we hold our yarn and tension our yarn and things like that. And you might just need to pick a different type of short row and find that all your holes in your shawl go away. Let's see. We have Jean saying, I could never work with a circular needle before I watched you last week making the wave hat. You made it look so easy. I'm going to try when I finished my current project. Well, thank you, Jean. So Jean's referring to this hat here. This is the gentle wave hat. I showed it to you earlier. And so, yes, in our live videos, I tend to, when I'm doing hats, because I have done quite a few hats, or even just in general projects in the round, I try to mix it up as far as showing you the magic loop method, which is actually my preferred method for knitting in the round, or showing you how to just use a circular needle and then switch to double pointed needles at the end. So I'm really glad that this has given you the courage to go forth and try to make something with a circular needle. And I actually love using circular needles for all of my projects, whether I'm knitting flat or in the round. I actually prefer the circular needle. You can see even this little swatch I'm using a circular needle. And here it's not so important, but even when I'm knitting flat, I do like that circular needle, because when you have more stitches, like if I'm doing a shawl or something, that cord really can hold the weight of your knitting very nicely and keeps the pressure off your wrists. So, so yeah, I encourage everybody to give those circular needles a try. So let's see, what else? We have Dale considers themselves intermediate and have knitted several projects and is now modifying for better fit. That's really great. My latest adventure is adding buttons to cardigans, and I can't seem to find the best way to go about that. Okay, so there are lots of different ways that you can add a button band and a buttonhole, and therefore buttons, to your sweater. The buttonhole that I like to use is a 1-row buttonhole, and we do have, of course, we have a video for that on our website, and we do have a few videos on finishing, adding buttons, talking about different button types and things like that, so I would encourage you to go check those out. So yeah, that's great. But yes, the spacing the buttonholes, that's just a little bit of, that does involve a little bit of planning. And one tip that I have picked up along the way is that if you are knitting a sweater in particular, for a female, that it's really important that you get one button right in the center here and then space them out from that way, just so you don't get any gaps or anything in your sweater. And I also am someone who has knit a button band on, this was many, many years ago, and I've gotten much better at adding buttonholes and button bands to my sweaters. But I used to have a problem where I didn't like when, even after I blocked my sweater, sometimes it would look like I had gaps in my sweater from where it was buttoned, but it was like my sweater totally fit. That's just how it looked. And I actually would either fully seam down the button band or sometimes even just crochet it down so it looked like a cardigan, but actually you had to pull it over your head because I had seamed it actually closed to avoid any gapping from the button band. Let's see, Jean asks, yarn has gotten very expensive. What do you think of using reasonably cheaper yarns? I am all for using cheaper yarns. The vast majority of the yarns that I use here at the Knitting Circle are purchased from like big box craft stores or online from inexpensive yarn retailers online. And of course, you can always go to your local yarn shop and find beautiful luxury yarns, but yarn is expensive, and it, as you said, is getting more expensive. But I have found, even just in the 20 plus years that I've been knitting, that the yarns that you get at the big box craft stores have come a long way, even in the 20 years that I've been knitting. So you can find really beautiful yarns for a very reasonable price. Where I live, we also have a thrift store that's like specifically for craft supplies, and so sometimes I'll go there and find brand new yarn with the label. It hasn't been wound up into a ball or knit into anything else yet. So even if you have one of those crafty thrift stores, I mean, even the regular thrift store I've seen yarn at as well. One thing we did do a video on last year, I think, is we actually talked about reusing your yarn. So I had taken one of my old shawls. It was an old shawl design that I had designed long time ago, and I found the end where the very end of my shawl where I had, I weaved in the end, and I carefully picked that back out, and then I unraveled the entire shawl and washed the yarn to sort of straighten out all those kinks, and then knit it into something else. So that's something else to consider is if you're trying to save a little bit of money on the yarn, because it can get expensive. Do you have any knitting projects? I mean, whether they're done or not, do you have any projects around the house that you know that you're never gonna finish? Or maybe it's, this case with the shawl, it was a shawl that I had knit many years ago. It was a tiny little shawlette of just 400 yards, which was very much the style at the time, but is not necessarily the style now. I didn't see myself wearing it again, so we took that as an opportunity to, make a new pattern, and I unraveled the yarn and washed it up and turned it into something else. So yeah, but absolutely, there is literally no shame if you are using yarn that you got at a dollar store, or if you are using the most expensive yarn that you can find out there. All yarn is good yarn, and that's that. So yes, don't think that there is no stigma around buying craft store yarn. Like I said, most of this yarn all came from a craft store and was inexpensive. I probably used a coupon for it. So let's see. Kathy says, I'm a novice and wonder why you use the long tail cast on versus casting on directly from the skein. And I also knit everything on circular needles. Love them. So there's just different types of cast-ons that you can choose to use, and it really, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because there are times where your cast-on does matter. And I think what you mean by casting on directly from the skein is maybe just doing a knitted on cast-on. So why don't we just take a look at that quick. We do have a free video for this on our website, but we have time and I have yarn, so why not? Okay, so another cast on you can do instead of a long tail cast on is a knitted, sometimes you see it called the knitted cast on or the knitted on cast on, which is kind of a mouthful. But to do that, all you just need to do is leave a tail that's long enough for you to weave in the end later. And then you're just going to go into the first stitch like you're going to knit. And then, if you were knitting, you would take the stitch off the left needle. We're just going to bring that left needle around and plop that stitch on from the right needle to the left. And then we just go into the stitch closest to the end on the left needle, knit it, and then rather than taking the loop off the left needle, we're going to take the loop from the right needle and put it onto the left needle. Now I find this cast on to be not quite as stretchy as the long tail cast on, and definitely not as stretchy as the German twisted cast on, which I showed you earlier. And there are advantages and disadvantages to why you'd want to use one over the other. For example, the long tail cast on, in general, the general rule is, I don't even know if I want to say rule because there's always exceptions, right? But the general rule with the long tail cast on is that when you make a long tail cast on, you're creating a right side row of knitting, and so your next row is going to be a wrong side row. And now this, of course, always depends on the designer. If they might tell you to use a long tail cast on and then the next row might be a right side, and that's fine. That's their pattern. They can choose to do that. But in general, a long tail cast on, the next row in general is a wrong side row. With this knitted cast on here, where we don't have to do any of that business with the long tail, what we have done is actually created something that it's kind of like creating a wrong side row, but it's been the right side was facing us the entire time. So when we do a long tail cast on, right, we're over here and we're casting on, and then we have to turn, and that's going to be a wrong side row. With this knitted cast on, we cast on our stitches and we don't turn because our yarn is right here, and then this creates, in general, then your next row would be a right side row. So that would be one reason you might choose one over the other. Again, it really comes down a lot to the designer or what you like as the knitter. Different cast-ons obviously look different, and so you can experiment. If you haven't checked out, there's actually 2 books. Both of them are called Cast On Bind Off, and they just happen to come out at the same time from 2 different publishers, and I have them both. But there are a couple of books called Cast On Bind Off that you can check out. Even if you don't want to go out and buy a new knitting book, I have seen these books at my library. And so these books are really great references that you can use to just look at all the different kinds of cast-ons and bind-offs there are. I reference it all the time when I'm trying to think of, is there some new cast-on or bind-off that I can show on the Knitting Circle? I'm always reaching for those books and just looking at what kind of cool things I can do that maybe I haven't tried before. But yes, there's all different cast-ons and all different reasons that we would use one cast-on over the other. Let's see, what about an invisible join in knitting in the round? That question is coming from Willie. I think maybe, let's see, with the casting on, what about going between the stitches for the cast on? That question's also from Willie. Okay, so let's go to your second question first, Willie, since I have some stitches already cast on. So with the knitted cast on, what about going between the stitches for the cast on? So yes, that's another type of cast on, and that one's called the cable cast on. So let me just take these few stitches out that I knit, and we'll just continue casting on this one, doing that cable cast on, and then we'll come back around to your other question. And just for clarification, Willie, are you asking about like joining in the round, and when you join, how to get like just a neat join when you actually join, or are you talking about something else? Because I think that's what you're talking about, but I don't want to, I'm just not sure. So if you're talking about something else, just let me know. So for the going between the stitches for the cast on, so you go like this. You go right in between the stitches like that. And that is called a cable cast on. So rather than going into the stitch, you go between the stitches. And then knit the stitch and do the same thing. Put it on the needle and go between the 2 stitches, just like that. And the cable cast on creates a more firm cast on. This is one of the less stretchier cast ons. And that's just because you're bringing your needle to the other side of the stitch. And so it's just going to make things not as stretchy. But I do like to use this cast on some projects, especially if I am doing just something like a scarf or even a side-to-side shawl. If I don't need that edge to be super stretchy for blocking my shawl, I do like the way it looks. And even if we take a close look, it's a little hard to see, but you could see here, I did a few cable cast on over here, and it almost looks almost like a rope-like. It almost just looks like rope wrapping around like this. And so that's that. Okay, and then your next question is, okay, yes, an invisible join for knitting in the round. So yes, you do mean when you're going to join to knit in the round. So I am going to cast on some stitches, and I'm going to answer the next question. So, okay, Katie Spins asks, do you have any suggestions for weaving in ends for slippery yarns like silk or bamboo? I've been tying knots, but I'm afraid they will rub on the skin. Yes, so when I am using a more slippery yarn like silk or bamboo, I tend to weave my ends in. First of all, I take a little more care rather than being a little, I can be a little lazy sometimes on weaving in the ends, but I will weave in more on a silk or bamboo yarn than I do with, say, like your acrylics or your wool yarns, because they are slippery. The other thing I do is, depending on the yarn, I might, the last few stitches, when I go to weave them in, I might split the plies of the yarn. Like rather than going like over and under a stitch, I might go like into the plies of the stitch, because that can help keep it in place even though it is slippery. And then another thing I will do is, I'll just show you on the end of one of these here. I think I might have actually weaved in all the ends on all these projects I have here. So basically, like, let's pretend that this was my end here that I wove in, and now I have like this little bit of a tail left. So like you trim your tail or whatever, and like your project ends here, and now you just have this little bit of a tail. And this isn't always gonna work with silk or bamboo just because it is so slippery, but you can sort of take your plies like this, and and obviously you'd wanna make sure this is on the inside of your project or wrong side of your project. You can kind of split the plies like this, and yes, that's not the neatest from the inside, right? Because you've got these like little plies hanging out here, but just separating those plies does make it a little bit harder for the yarn to come back through. And then the last thing I would say is if you are using a silk or a bamboo yarn and you're going to then block your piece, like if you're making a shawl or something, you might want to, and I actually do this on a lot of projects, not just for silk or bamboo yarns. I weave in my ends before I block it, but I either then trim the ends so that there's maybe 2 or 3 inches left just hanging out, and then I block it, and then I do a final trim of the ends. And that also just kind of helps, because when you go to block it and you stretch it out, then your end kind of gets like sucked into your knitting. And then if you have a little bit of an end left, you can trim it and then even just do this little thing here where you're splitting the plies. And I will be honest, I don't necessarily put knots into my knitting, and I'm not opposed to putting knots in your knitting. I know that there are a lot of designers and instructors out there that will tell you under no circumstances should you put a knot in your knitting. But the reality is you are the boss of your knitting, and so if you want to put knots in your knitting, I'm not going to stop you. So just keep that in mind. I sometimes will just like not necessarily put a knot, but I'll kind of loop the tail kind of over itself once at the end, sort of to lock it in place. So it's not a full knot necessarily, and I find that that helps too. So hopefully one of those tips will help you as well. Let's see. Oh, Willie is asking, I'm still casting on my stitches for you here, Willie, but you've asked another question. What do I use for a blocking table? What I do is I have some foam mats, and they are specifically branded for blocking your knitting, but you don't necessarily need the foam mats that are marketed for your knitting. You can use those like children, they're the interlocking mats, like at like kids daycare centers, they have like the interlocking mats with like the alphabet on it. Basically like those, so you could buy those. It's even like floor, you can get like flooring like that for your garage from like the hardware store, or you could buy, mine are 12 by 12 squares, made branded again for knitting, and they come in like a pack of 12 or something. And then if I don't have a table that's big enough, I will just put those mats onto like my floor in my living room, but then I'm pinning into those mats. I'm not pinning into like my carpet or anything like that. Some people do use a spare bed. If you have a spare bedroom at your house, you could use a spare bed. If you go that route, word of caution, first of all, you're sticking a bunch of pins into a bed, so like be careful. But also I would recommend putting a towel or a blanket you don't care about or something else down before you block your piece on, like your grandmother's quilt or something, because when you are blocking pieces, sometimes the yarn can still run, especially if you've knit something, say in like a red yarn, a dark blue yarn, those yarns can, especially if it's a hand-dyed yarn, those can really end up bleeding a lot. And so I would hate for you to ruin your grandmother's quilt she made for you when you were a baby or something. So, but I do know that some people use just like a spare bed. But if I do recommend checking out some of those blocking mats. We do have a few videos on blocking, so you can see some examples of those. If you go to the blocking or finishing section of our website, you should be able to find some blocking videos there. Let's see. Oh, Katie says, that's so helpful. I love splitting the plies. They are all great tips. Thank you. And I have to admit, that splitting the plies tip, I never knew that. Or I guess I had never thought about it until I watched a video on the Knitting Circle. It's one of our more recent videos from Ann Budd. I can't remember the exact title. It might be 3 Tips for Better Knitting, but it's one of the more recent videos that we have on our website that Ann Budd did. And she talked about splitting the plies, and I was like, whoa, that's such a great idea. So I'm even learning from our own website too. So I'm glad that I could now then pass that knowledge along to you that I learned from our own website. Okay, Willie, here we go. So now let's talk about our join here. I think I've cast on enough stitches here for our join. Okay, so now we're going to join in the round here. And so we want to have, first we're going to make sure that all of our stitches are going in the right direction, right? Because we don't want to put that twist in our knitting. So I always personally put my cast on edge towards the middle here. And then we're going to join in the round. And then I guess in this case it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter how many stitches I have on. But so for my pattern that I am following, so whatever pattern you're following, whatever hat pattern, whether it's a knitting circle pattern or whatever pattern, I cast on 1 extra stitch. So if my hat pattern calls for 60 stitches, I'm going to cast on 61. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my first stitch that I cast on, so that will be on the left needle, and I'm going to slip it purlwise to the right needle. Then I'm going to take that extra stitch that I cast on and pass it over and off. So essentially I'm just binding off that stitch. And because that stitch that we just bound off was the last stitch, it'll be a little loose, but you can just pull on your working yarn just a little bit. And look at that. It's just so nice and neatly joined, and then you can, just take your stitch marker or whatever and just keep on going with whatever your pattern is. Because I know sometimes when you're working in the round, you can, at that beginning, you get that little space there that, you get that like one annoying strand of yarn, and it does kind of go away, and you can use your tail to fix it later. But of all the ways to join in the round neatly and tightly, I mean, obviously you don't want it too tight, but I found that this is the best way. So I'm going to just take that out and show you just one more time. Okay, let's see. All right, so let's just get some of these stitches back on here. Okay, so you cast on 1 extra stitch, then what you need for your project, you slip purlwise the stitch from the left needle to the right needle, you take that extra stitch and you pass it over that stitch and off, just like that. And then you've joined in the round. And that's all there is to it. So that's really great. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few more projects that I have here that we've worked on over the last couple years. And while I'm doing that, let's see, what other questions do I want to ask you? I want to know, the new year is coming. I know it seems like, how is it already November? It's going to be January 1st before we know it. I was wondering if any of you had any knitting goals for 2023, or even general crafting goals. I would love to know that too. I love all the crafts, not just knitting. So do you have any specific goals you're starting to think about for the new year that you would like to achieve? And whether that's going back to techniques you want to just learn, or just things you want to knit, or whatever, let me know. Okay, so Willie says, how do you get the extra stitch for following rows? Oh, so for that technique, because you're casting on that extra stitch, then I slip the stitch and then I pass that extra stitch over and off, essentially binding it off. So then once I've joined in the round, I'm back at my original stitch count. So you don't have to worry about dealing with that extra stitch because we already dealt with it when we bound it off, and that's what joined it neatly. Okay, so let's look at some of our other patterns here. We looked at a lot of hats already, but we've got one more hat to look at. This one is the Stitch Witch hat, which I made for right before Halloween this year. And so this is actually a plastic headband that I purchased online, and I just knit a little cover for it. And again, this is all acrylic yarn. This is literally made with yarn that was probably like $2 or $3 a skein or something like that. And the hat itself is stuffed with fiber fill, and then I added, this is actually a little like clasp that you would probably sew onto like a belt or something, but I just stitched it on here because I thought it looked a little witchy. But this might give you a few ideas, like even if you don't want to knit a witch hat, you could even just go and grab the pattern if you have some headbands. You could even just knit cute little headband, like what a cute little project for a kid, right? Like a little present for a kid. My niece, when she was a little bit younger, the girl lived for a headband, so this would have been a great project for her, just to get some of those yarn scraps together and even just knit and cover the headband. But the witchy hat always is a nice little touch too. And then we have some cowls here that I've knit. This one actually is a really great beginner project, and I think would be great for somebody that's pretty new to knitting and is looking for something besides just a plain old scarf, and which I never recommend a scarf as a first project for a knitter anyway. But this odds and ends cowl here is basically knit with scraps of yarn that I had from other projects. And I held 2 yarns together. So this yarn here, I think it was like a heavy worsted or a bulky weight yarn. And so when you hold them together, obviously you need a needle size for like a super bulky yarn. So I probably used a size 11 or 13 or something needle on this project. And that information, of course, is all in the pattern. And you just do some garter stitch in the round. Then we just did regular stockinette, and then I did just a little bit of seed stitch, and I just kind of switched the colors however I wanted. For this particular one, I held the light blue all the way through throughout the entire cowl, and then just switched sort of the contrasting colors just however I wanted. And I love this project. It was so easy. It just uses like basically all the stitch patterns you learn right when you first start knitting. But it made this beautiful piece. And that sort of leads me into a little teaser for tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to have another live event where I'm going to be making the odds and ends hat. And so you can see I actually used a different color combo here. But the techniques are all pretty much the same. We're going to hold 2 yarns together and then we're going to do ribbing, of course, and then do some stockinette stitch and seed stitch, and then we finished it off. I really love doing the tops of my hats, my big pom-poms in the way, where we're using central double decreases here at the top. And so if I would wear these together anyway, but you could make them with similar yarns and then have yourself a little matching set. So, if you're around tomorrow and you want to watch me make a hat live, that would be great. I'm actually going to be joined by Brenda KB Anderson, who is the managing editor of the Creative Crochet Corner, and she is going to be crocheting a scarf using leftover yarn. So we are going to be doing that together tomorrow, which is super great. But like all our live events, if you can't catch us tomorrow, you can always watch the replay on our website. So let's see, Alexis says, what is your favorite cast on for a ribbed neckline? I would use that German twisted cast on I showed you at the beginning, and that is in our download. Personally, that's the one I like the best. That's the one I would use. If you're looking for something a little bit different to try, we do have a couple of videos on how to do ribbed cast on. So it's basically you're casting on to make a knit stitch and then casting on to make a purl stitch, and then once you've watched that video, you can figure out for your own particular pattern how you would need to do those maneuvers to get your cast on correct for whatever type of ribbing pattern you're going to do. But for me, I'm always going to use that German twisted cast on for a rib neckline. Let's see, and then Alexis says, my knitting goal for 2023 is to not buy any new yarn and use my stash. That is a good goal, and one I think many of us, including myself, should set, because I know I have a lot of yarn in the stash, and it's always growing. Yeah, even some of my friends, we've attended that New York Sheep and Wool Festival in Rhinebeck, New York before. We love going to it. It's so much fun. But this past year, we actually decided to not go because we realized that we had yarn from previous times we had gone that we had not knit with yet, and so we thought it was in our best interest not to go buy more yarn. So that's a really great goal. One thing I did one year, just to give you an idea, as far as how you can make make this stash busting goal a little more fun. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, I was very into knitting socks and the very complicated sock patterns. And I actually got this idea from the Yarn Harlot blog, and she had done the same thing, and I then did it too. I picked out 12 knitting patterns, sock patterns that I already had. I had a lot of sock knitting books. I had patterns I had purchased online, things like that. I took 12 patterns and I looked at them, and then I looked at all the sock yarn I had, and then I picked out yarn for each one of those patterns, and then I put them into, well, I had enough project bags. I put each one into a project bag. So once it went in the project bag, I couldn't see what was inside, and then every month I would just go into my closet and pick out a bag, and whatever sock pattern and sock yarn I had put in there with it is the socks I made that month. So even if you don't knit socks, you could do that with any project, and it doesn't have to be every month. If you don't finish a project in a month, I mean, you could do that with 4 projects in a year, 2 projects in a year. But I found that made it a little bit more fun because, especially by the time I got to the end of the year, I had kind of forgotten what I had put in some of those project bags. So I'd open it and it'd be like, oh, it was almost like having new yarn again, because you're like, oh, yay, look, I already own this, and now I get to knit with it. So that might be something fun to try as well. Let's see. Let me see. Okay. All right, let's just see. Got a lot of questions coming in here. Okay, Gianni says, my goal is to knit a sweater for myself, but you're new to knitting and it's a goal. And yes, and as some of you have said, you are interested in learning some basic sweater construction. So I think that's something that we will, attempt to visit at some point in 2023, since a lot of you do want to knit sweaters, and knitting sweaters is super fun. So hopefully we can help you with that as a goal. Sue is asking, how do you get garter stitch in the round? That's a really great question, and I did that on this cowl here. And so to get garter stitch in the round, you do have to treat it different, because when you're knitting garter stitch flat back and forth in rows, probably the first thing you've learned when you're knitting is that you knit on both the right side and the wrong side. Well, when you're working in the round, you're always on the right side of your work because you're just going in the round. Your right side is always facing you. So to get garter stitch in the round, all you have to do is just knit one round and then purl one round. So you just knit around, purl around, knit around, purl around, and just keep repeating that over and over again to get garter stitch in the round. So it's actually very easy. Let's see, I have a ton of traditional knitting needles. Can I create a cowl on traditional knitting needles? Absolutely you can. But there's a but there. So you're not going to, if you just have flat, straight, single point knitting needles, that they have the stopper on the end, you're not going to be able to knit in the round. But what you can do is you can knit something flat and then seam it up. So you might even, almost knit back and forth this way and then join your cast on edge and your bind off edge together to make a cowl. You could knit something that's longer side to side, but that might end up being a lot of stitches crammed up on your needle. So my suggestion is basically you could knit something like a scarf and then seam it together, 3-needle bind off together. There's all sorts of ways you could seam it up then into a cowl. And so if you do end up doing something like that, I would encourage you, we have a bunch of videos on seaming. So you could find find which seaming method might work for you to do that, because I don't really wear a lot of scarves. I think the reason I've shown a lot of cowls over the last 2 years on the Knitting Circle is because that's what I like to wear in the winter. Let's see. Jean says, my daughter has gifted me jumbo knitting needles, and I'm planning on making myself a cardigan with them. I'm told we can use 4 times DK. Oh, you can use 4 DK weight yarns held together. And that will be the same as the jumbo wool. Any ideas on that, please? So yes, you absolutely can hold 4 together. I actually made a baby blanket like that. As far as what yarn to use or ideas on that, I mean, I guess for this one where I've done 2 different colors here, if you were to say hold those 4 yarns together, obviously if you hold 4 of the same color together, it's going to be very solid. You could hold 2 of one color, 2 of another, and kind of get this marled look. I think that would be really, really beautiful. And there are even some worsted weight yarns. I tend to think at the craft store, they do have DK weight yarn at the big box craft stores, but in general, they tend to more have worsted weight yarn. And, I feel like if you're going to have to hold 4 DK weight yarns together, that's something that you're probably going to want to maybe look at some more inexpensive yarns. I mean, depending on what your budget is, but you're going to need a lot of yarn. So even a lightweight worsted from the craft store would be great, because they usually have a lot of skeins in like the same dye lot too, which will be important. And yeah, just go for it. And if you do end up making that, I would love to see it, and I would encourage you to post it on our project gallery on our Knitting Circle website. And let's see. Katie says, my 2023 goal is to knit a hoodie, one with wool and one with cotton and bamboo. My weakness is necklines, especially when the hood is attached. That's a really great goal. And I bought a hoodie knitting pattern 15 years ago, and I still haven't knit it. So maybe that should be a goal for us maybe here at the Knitting Circle in 2023. Let's put a hood on something, and let's make sure our necklines look really good after we've done that. Let's see. Oh, Willie says they want to take a sweater apart to repurpose it, maybe mittens, and with the fold back top. That's a great idea. Oh, will I be demonstrating the stretchy bind off today? Yes, why don't I do that right now? Yes, we're coming just about to the end of our time here. Okay, so our stretchy bind off is the knit 2 together through the back loop bind off, and this is my personal favorite. I have designed a lot of shawls over the years and a lot of top-down shawls, and so I'm always in search of that stretchy bind off. So this bind off is so easy, and that's also why I like it, because it's easy and it's fast and it's stretchy. So all you're going to do is take your right needle, stick it into the next 2 stitches to go through their back loops. So you're going into the back, and we're knitting those 2 stitches together through their back loops. Don't need my stitch marker anymore. Then we're going to place the stitch from the right needle back to the left needle and knit 2 stitches together through the back loop again. Take the stitch from the right needle, put it back to the left needle, and then that's all you're doing is you're just knitting 2 stitches together through the back loop. You just keep slipping over to the left needle, knit 2 together through the back loop. And I get to a point where this is all kind of one motion. You might find you even like to do it like this, where I'm bringing the stitch from the left needle to the right needle, and then in one sort of swoop, I'm getting the needles configured to knit them together through the back loops. So you can do it either way, where you either bring it to the right needle or you bring it to the left. But either way, you're just knitting 2 together through the back loop. And this creates a really stretchy bind off. It is not the stretchiest bind off, but this one for me, I think it looks nice on the bottom of my project, or I'm thinking bottom because I'm usually putting it at the bottom of a shawl, but it looks really nice. It's stretchy, but it's not so elastic that, everything's going to get stretched out and kind of wonky. And you just want to keep it loose while you're doing this one. And that's all there is to it, and it's really fast, and that's why I like it, because even when you have, when I'm doing these shawls and I have 300 or 400 or more stitches to bind off at the end, I like that it's so fast. And so you would just keep doing that all the way across until you have your one stitch left and end it off. So we just have a couple minutes left here, so let's just look at the last couple projects I have. So here I have the Gentle Waves cowl that I did a few weeks ago, and then last week I did the hat that matches. So I've actually been trying to incorporate a few matching sets into some of our live projects, just so we can have matching accessories. That's always nice. And then I have a couple little sort of toys. We did the Bunny Buddy one year at springtime, and this one just sits in my office year round. We've done a pumpkin, and this year when I did the pumpkin, I showed you how to make this little pumpkin vine. So that's really cute for fall. So you could even go back and check that out, for in November this month if you still want some fall decor. And then we have this pillow that I made, the Summer Seaside pillow, which actually was the first pillow I ever knit. I never had knit one before. And so, I just used a pillow form that I bought online. You can find those at the craft store, and made myself a little pillow. So that's just some of the projects that we've done over the last 2 years and some of the most popular techniques. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you had a great time. This was so much fun. It felt like I was just sitting and chatting with my knitting group or something, just kind of, just chatting about the thing we love the most, right, is knitting. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for a wonderful 2 years here at the Knitting Circle, and happy knitting, and I'll see you again here soon. Bye.